Welcome to this session on tools for project management in education. My name is Joe Edney, and I'm joined here today by my colleague.
Hello, I'm Laurie Baker.
And we're going to share with you over the next 45 minutes or so an actionable set of strategies you can use to improve project management across virtually any project in education. So before we jump into the content, I want to share with you something that might feel like a familiar example. So on this first image, you'll see this is how the superintendent explained this project. This is how the project leader understood it. This is how the project team designed it. This is how it performed in testing. This, of course, is how it was funded, and you'll notice there's a $0 mark there. This is how the parents described it, hopefully. This is how the students described it. This is how the staff responded, how the project was documented, and here's what was really needed. And so hopefully by using some project management strategies, we can start with a tire swing and have it be a tire swing throughout as opposed to trying to guess along the way. So today our objectives are twofold. First, we're going to review a few project management fundamentals, and then we're going to examine 3 tools to help address common project management challenges. And it's interesting how this came about because I'll say from my part, my background is not in education traditionally. In fact, I started my career as a business consultant working with energy companies as they work through strategic planning and implementation of different strategies. I found myself moving into education and upon conversations with colleagues realized that this could be a really valuable thing to look at in school-based settings.
And this is Laurie. My background is more in the traditional education space, so I still consider myself a practitioner, but I am a former high school English teacher, middle school assistant principal, high school assistant principal, high school principal. And as I began to learn about this magical concept called project management, which is not something that I was exposed to in my traditional training to become a principal, I thought, man, this would have made my life so much easier because I know that like you all, you find yourselves either on the planning side or delegating planning for many different initiatives throughout the course of a school year. And some that are even in ways reoccurring, like graduation. If I had these tools when I had to plan high school graduation ceremonies, it would have made things much simpler from one year to the next.
So first we'll start by defining what a project is. And to do that, they really need to meet 2 basic criteria. First, a project is temporary. So that means it has a defined beginning and end time. Too often we get caught in the trap of calling things projects that are actually just ongoing work. So it should be temporary in that it has a beginning and an end. A project is also unique in that it's not a routine operation, but a specific set of operations designed to accomplish a goal. And so again, we have a clear start, a clear end, and a unique goal of a project. And so we'll take a moment and talk amongst ourselves about examples, and then also solicit ideas about common challenges that you encounter. So as many of you cited, a lot of the issues that are commonly occurring in projects are things that we'll try to address in some of these tools. I think all of them can be covered here. But to put a little more of a framework around it, I think most of them can be bucketed into one of 3 core variables. And this is what we call the triple constraint. And it really comes down to 3 factors that really bound any project that you take on. First is cost. So the amount of money and effort we need to accomplish the goal. The next one is time. So how much time do we need to accomplish the goal? And then of course the third is the scope. So what specific work is required to accomplish the goal? Taken in tandem, these 3 things represent a triple constraint and all 3 must be balanced. At times, some are emphasized over others. And that's not always a bad thing, but it's important to make sure that all 3 are attended to throughout the life of any given project. So the last thing I'll talk about in terms of some Project Management 101 are the stages of a project. And there is something called the Project Management Institute, which can certify you as a project management professional, and you can go through all kinds of study and deeper digging into the academic side of project management and what's been done on that. But I'll give you a crash course in sort of the 5 phases of any given project, and it starts with initiation. Initiation is the start of the project, and the goal, of course, is to define the project at a broad level. For example, identifying who the stakeholders are and what the objectives are. The next phase is planning, and the key to success to any project, in my opinion, really begins here at the planning phase, and so much of the success will flow from this. The next part is execution, and so that, of course, is executing on what was planned. Following that is monitoring. So how are we thinking about measuring project progression? How are we adapting performance and so forth? And then finally, the 5th phase is close. So what are we doing to close out the project, ensure it was effectively documented, sharing results, and any other closeout activities? The focus today really, all 3 tools we're going to share are focused on initiation and planning. So really at these first 2 phases where if you don't have the right things set up, things can go awry quite quickly. So we're going to put the idea into practice here, and we're going to create a scenario where we're actually going to test how these tools apply to a live example. So we've got some cards here, and we're going to ask one person to draw a card that defines a cost amount, another person to draw a card that defines the time, and a third to draw a card that defines the scope. And we'll write these here up on a whiteboard sheet of paper and use that as an example as we apply these tools over the next 15 or 20 minutes. So now that we have our scenario mapped, we've got 3 tools that we're going to use to apply to it. And so we'll jump into the first one next. The first tool is called a project charter. And this is really a document that provides a summary level description of the project and defines key variables. While this sometimes can feel like an exercise in monotony to sort of document some things that feel obvious to the project manager, it's tremendously helpful for others to mitigate confusion about different things that pop up during the life of any project. So the problem the charter is intended to address are twofold. Really, the first one's confusion about what, why, who, when, and how. So making sure that we all have a touchstone to go back to. And the second one, of course, is misalignment of actions with outcomes. So when we think about what we're trying to accomplish, this serves as something we can continue to go back to make sure that we're not drifting from what we intended to do. So here's what it looks like. Typically, it's a simple document, ideally on 1 page alone. Usually, an organization will define a template, so a school might create its own template that aligns to some of the needs that they have. But some of the basic fields include project name, objective, a scope summary, start and end times, team members and lead. And typically, there's at least some identification of resources. And so this should feel familiar because we just talked about things that make up that triple constraint. So we have seen this used to really good effect in school settings, and I'll ask Lori if she'll share a little bit about an example of this that we've shared here on the slide.
So at your tables, you all have this sample that was pulled together from a district that we work with in North Carolina. And their charter is around the specific goal of maintaining high quality teachers in all subject areas. This is a very common goal that most school folks can relate to. So it helps us to translate this tool into how is this applicable in the world of education. So you can see there that they have their goal clearly stated with objectives, and then they define the scope and purpose as how they're going to increase the number of teacher applicants, how they're going to decrease teacher attrition, and how they're going to ensure that high quality teaching and learning is happening in their schools. The next section, you'll see their anticipated dates where they're going to focus on this goal, the team members who will be involved in this particular initiative, desired end result, Supporting resources. So there they have things like LinkedIn and job fairs, business advisory boards, and then their plan for reporting progress. They're going to report the progress on this at every leadership team meeting.
So the second tool we'll talk about is what's called a work breakdown structure. And here's where we're going to get into a few activities with you all. But the first thing to mention is that this is a tool designed to organize the project into small, more manageable sections in an aligned way. So it's kind of the epitome of the best way to eat an elephant, which of course is one bite at a time. So the work breakdown structure is intended to address a few problems. First, becoming overwhelmed with where to start. So often these problems feel so daunting and projects are so far-reaching that it can be intimidating to know where to even start scratching the surface. In addition, this objective here around work breakdown helps to keep folks from straying from what's needed to complete the project's objective. So in other words, avoiding what we often refer to as scope creep. And then finally, a lack of a shared understanding about what is needed to accomplish the objective. And a classic example of this being used to good effect comes in the form of planning events. And so thinking about all the little nuance that's needed for that. So next we'll show you an example. So here's an example of what it looks like in action. It breaks down each bucket of work into its component parts or derivatives. It can be graphical or text-based, and I've seen it done either way. And so on the right side of the screen, you'll notice there's an example. So at the top, at the very uppermost row, you see it says bicycle. The next row are all the components that make up a bicycle, everything from the frame set to the crank to wheels, braking system, shifting system, integration, and the often forgotten element of project management. So this is put right here on this second tier. In addition, beneath that, you'll see that some of these components are broken down further into what it's going to take to, for example, develop a frame set. So you can see how this can become really complex or be really quite summarized, and it just depends on what the nature of the project calls for. But this is a good way to get a visual representation of any given project. And next, we're going to actually build one with a partner based on the scenario that we have with, of course, our triple constraint factors here today. So now I'll turn it over to Lori, who's going to walk you through exactly what this exercise will entail.
So as we think about the particular triple constraint that we drew a few minutes ago, we're going to start thinking about how we would actually get this work accomplished. So you'll see the example that Joe just gave with the bicycle reflected here, but we're going to do it in a little bit of a different order. So step one, you would initiate this process by just simply writing the project name. What is it that we're trying to do at the very top of your paper? Instead of working from the top down to the bottom, we're actually going to skip that middle part. And then step two, we're going to just brainstorm for a few minutes all the different project tasks that you can think of. Now, when I go back to my graduation example from much earlier in our session, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, did I remember to have the sashes pressed for the marshals? Did I remember to get the medals for the valedictorian and salutatorian? All those little things that'll wake you up in the middle of the night where you wonder, was somebody taking care of that? Is it already done? Those are the things that you want to just kind of brain dump onto sticky notes. And so take a few minutes and write down one thing on each sticky note. And by the time you finish, you should have this massive pile of sticky notes with all these individual tasks that need to be done. That's step two. Then step three, we go back to that middle section, and we're going to create some affinity groups out of all your different sticky notes. So for example, back to the graduation example, you might have a whole category around, let's say, flowers. You want flowers for your marshals. You want flowers for your dignitaries who are speaking. You need flowers for in front of the podium. And for those of you who have done graduation ceremony planning before, you know that these are the kinds of little things that you can't leave out. So you could have a whole group around just flowers and list all of the tasks below in your stickies. in that way. And in thinking about it in this 3-step process, that's how you can very quickly create a work breakdown structure.
The last tool, which is a Gantt chart. That's G-A-N-T-T, a fellow's last name from long ago who invented this method of scheduling. But what it's intended to do is serve as a tool to help you visually organize sequence of these tasks. It's intended to address the quintessential problem of where are we now? Uncertainty about sequence, challenge in accommodating unexpected changes, and then lack of clarity about the impact of changes. And so what this looks like is usually set up as something of a critical path type of diagram. And so those same things that you just shared that are in your top line, so planning, implementation, logistics, recruitment, and so forth, those things then populate the map or your Gantt chart that you use along the way, so in that vertical column. And then next to that, logistics might in fact require the entirety of the project to work on, whereas recruiting might just be a short window. And what you can then create are what are the things that must happen before we can begin the next item in the list. And as we go down through, we begin to identify what are those milestones that just, if we slip on this one thing, it's going to mess up, it's going to back up everything else along the way. And that allows you to really help prioritize. So in a project scenario, you might have some kind of, let's say you have a conference that you're going to present at about externships coming up. The conference date is not going to move. So it might be important to start with that conference date and then work backwards from it, right? So backwards design. A lot of these same concepts are things that you probably use daily in your classroom and in your districts, and yet mapping them out like this can be a really effective exercise for things even like externships. Here's an example of a Gantt chart that our team actually used for a project that we partnered with Educate Texas on just recently. And I'm looking at a couple folks in the back who are our partners in that regard, but this is to show that we're not just talking about this stuff as theory. We actually use this every single time we do a project, and it makes a big difference in the way we're able to navigate moving to and from different things. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving, and the thing that I want to push us into is actually the wild card. And so any good project has a wild card, and in our scenario, it turns out our current superintendent in our school district, where we are implementing this externship project, just got hired away and is moving out of state, packing up, gone tomorrow. But the good news is we have a new superintendent coming into town, and they said immediately that they would like to make some changes in the way we're addressing this project. So Lori has some wild cards, and she's getting someone to pick one. What does that say, Lori? So the new superintendent came in and said, oh, you know what, 90 days was ridiculous, but $0 wasn't. So that said, instead of 90 days, we now have 1 year, still with $0. So in any project, there are going to be these kinds of wild cards. Something is going to change along the way. And so if we have our Gantt chart, for example, and suddenly, instead of mapping across the top a 90-day window every 30 days, now we can map 12 months worth of time. Suddenly, our recruitment effort looks different, right? We can recruit more businesses, for example, or we can have different opportunities for teachers to engage in this kind of an opportunity. The work breakdown structure might look different because in 90 days, we didn't have time to formalize a communication strategy or a campaign externally. In a year, we might actually be able to do that. In 90 days, we couldn't get a parent advisory group to help start recruiting businesses to participate, and now we can. And so what those tools provide is an avenue for us to then go back and maneuver ourselves around the change. So in this case, now we have a year, and that opens up all kinds of new opportunities. Now the opposite can happen as well. He could have picked a wild card that said 30 days. And so then it might look dramatically different to the point where we might say, this is as best as we can do in 30 days with no budget on teacher externships. But all that to say, when you have a project charter in place, and you're able to use that to help you address the triple constraint of time, cost, and scope, when you understand where you are in the life cycle of a project, and then using these tools, project charter, work breakdown structure, and Gantt chart, they'll allow you to adapt to virtually any wild card that can come up. And hopefully, if implemented effectively from the start, it'll allow you to prevent some of those quintessential issues like who's on first, how do we communicate, and what are the ways that we need to adapt our project plan. So with that said, I'm going to stop because we've got 2 minutes left and invite any final questions before we close out this session.
I want to say two things in terms of the SCAD app. So when you click on this session, that gives our feedback on how you like this session, and how it went. So make sure you click on your session, and then you can give us feedback and do the evaluations. That's with every session, even the ones you did earlier today. And then secondly, I know you have some great resources for us. When you can't find that on your app on your phone, but you can get it when you log in on that original email you got to set up. So from there you can get all the resources and PowerPoints and handouts and things that they presented to us and throughout the workshops as well. Okay? Any other questions for Joe?
All right, everyone. Oh, go ahead. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great final session of the day. Thank you.